3 years after my wife died. I went to my son's Thanksgiving dinner, hoping to sit beside my 10-year-old grandson. Before dessert, a diamond bracelet was found inside my coat, and my son asked me to confess. My grandson said nothing until he unlocked his tablet. The video began at 4:17, and the first hand entering the frame wore a ring I recognized. I appreciate you being here with me. Before we begin, do me a small favor. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever been accused of something you didn't do by someone you trusted? Yes or no? I read every one. A quick note, some details in this story are fictionalized to deepen the emotional impact. The lesson behind it is what I hope stays with you. The bracelet came out of my coat pocket like a verdict. Slow, deliberate. Held up for every eye in the room to convict me before I could open my mouth. I stood in the hallway of my son's home in Scarsdale. 68 years old. A retired jewelry appraiser with reading glasses still perched on my forehead and the smell of roasted turkey mixing with perfume I couldn't afford. Vivica Prescott, 64. A former luxury event planner who still dressed as though she were organizing galas for governors, held the bracelet between two manicured fingers. Her nails were lacquered red against the worn wool of my coat, and the expression on her face was the satisfied look of a woman who had just proven exactly what she had always suspected about me. "I knew it," she said. Not to me, to the room. "I knew from the moment he walked in." The hallway went silent. The kind of silence that doesn't just happen, it lands on you. My son Garrett stood 6 feet behind her. My daughter-in-law stood behind him. My grandson, somewhere in the dining room, was too young to understand what was happening, but old enough to remember it. 41 years. That's how long I spent grading stones, setting bezels, telling people the truth about what they owned, even when the truth cost me the sale. 41 years of honest work. And this was the hand I was dealt at 68, standing in a hallway that smelled like Thanksgiving and tasted like an accusation. "Someone call the police," the Vecca said. "Now!" I didn't move. I didn't speak. Not because I was guilty, but because when you've spent your whole life being precise, you learn that the worst thing you can do in a moment like that is react before you understand exactly what's been done to you. 3 weeks earlier. That's where this really starts. Not in a hallway with a stolen bracelet, but at a workbench with a watch that nobody wanted fixed. I was sitting in my apartment in Yonkers. 1 bedroom, 1 window that caught the afternoon light if the angle was right, and a workbench I'd built from the counter of my old shop on McLean Avenue. The shop had been called Caldwell & Son Jewelers. I'd closed it 15 years ago to pay for Garrett's tuition at Fordham. Sold the display cases, the tools I couldn't carry, and the lease I'd held for 22 years. The son in the name never worked a day behind that counter. The son was the reason it closed. I don't say that with bitterness. I say it because it's true. And because the truth is the only currency I've ever carried that held its value. The pocket watch in front of me was a 1940s Hamilton. Nobody had commissioned the repair. I'd found it at an estate sale for $12, and I was rebuilding its mainspring because my hands needed something to do, and my apartment was too quiet for a man who used to spend 10 hours a day talking to customers about clarity and carat weight. The phone rang at 4:30. "Dad!" Garrett's voice. 38 years old. An operations manager at a logistics company in White Plains. He had the cheerful tone people use when they're following a script someone else wrote. "Sloan thought it'd be nice to have the whole family this year. You know, since Mom's been gone, 3 years now," Sloan thought. Not he thought. I noticed the difference the way I notice a scratch on a bezel automatically, without trying. Because 41 years of looking closely at things rewires the way you see everything. Thanksgiving, I said. At our place, Thursday. Sloane's mother is coming too. Sloane's mother. Vivica Prescott. The woman who, at her own birthday party the year before, had worn a diamond bracelet worth more than my apartment, and made a point of telling me exactly how much it cost while I was eating cake off a paper plate. I should have said no. Every instinct I had, the same instincts that kept me from buying bad stones for 4 decades, told me to stay home, repair the Hamilton, eat leftover soup, and let the holiday pass the way all holidays had passed since my wife died. Quietly, alone, without incident. "I'll be there, son," I said. "I'll bring the sweet potatoes." I hung up and set the phone on the workbench next to the open Hamilton. My hands had a tremor now that hadn't been there a minute ago. Not because of the invitation, because of last Thanksgiving. And the thing I'd noticed about Vivica Prescott's bracelet that I'd spent 12 months trying to forget. The light had passed through the center stone too cleanly, too politely, the way it only does through glass. The first time I held Vivica Prescott's bracelet, my hands knew something my mouth refused to say. It was November of the year before her 63rd birthday. Thrown at the Prescott residence in Bronxville. The kind of house where even the doorbell sounds expensive. Catered food, fresh-cut flowers on every surface, champagne flutes that weighed more than the watch I was repairing back home. I'd been invited because Garrett and Sloane were there. And leaving out the father-in-law would have looked worse than including him. That's the math of families like the Prescotts. Everything is presentation. Vivica found me in the dining room, standing alone near the buffet with a glass of champagne I'd barely sipped. She was wearing the bracelet. She made sure I saw it before she said a word. "You used to appraise pieces like this, didn't you?" she said, extending her wrist like she was offering communion. "Before you closed up shop? Tell me, is it as good as they say?" She wasn't asking because she wanted an answer. She was asking because she wanted to watch a retired man hold something worth more than his apartment and feel the distance between what he used to be and what he'd become. I knew that. I took it anyway. I unclasped it gently and held it under the dining room chandelier, tilting the center stone the way I'd tilted 10,000 stones in the shop on McLean Avenue. And that's when the quiet alarm went off inside my chest. The alarm that never rings for the wrong reason. A natural diamond fights the light. It bends it, breaks it, throws it across the room like a tantrum. What I held that evening was polite. Too polite. The light passed through the center stone the way a lie passes through a smile, smoothly, without resistance, without a single crack in the performance. The refraction was too uniform, too clean. The weight in my palm was a fraction lighter than it should have been for the setting's carat claim. These are things that no one at a birthday party would notice. These are things that a man who spent 4 decades behind a jeweler's loop cannot stop noticing, even if he wanted to. I handed it back. "It's a beautiful piece, Vivica," I said. "Your family chose well." She smiled the way people smile when they've gotten exactly what they came for. She clasped it back on her wrist and returned to her guests, leaving me standing under the chandelier with the taste of dry champagne on my tongue and a question I didn't want to carry home. But I carried it home anyway. The Sawmill River Parkway was dark and quiet at 9 o'clock that night. My headlights cut through the November fog, and in my head I replayed the moment over and over, the tilt, the refraction, the weight. I argued with myself the way old men do when the truth is too expensive to speak out loud. "You're 67, I told myself. "You closed the shop. You haven't graded a stone professionally in 14 years. The chandelier light was warm, not daylight balanced. "You're seeing what you want to see. What do you do When your hands know something that your mouth would burn the whole house down by saying. You do what I did. You park the car. You climb the stairs to your one-bedroom apartment. You set your keys on the workbench next to the Hamilton pocket watch, and you bury it. I told myself I was wrong. Told myself retirement had dulled the one skill I'd spent a lifetime sharpening. Told myself that accusing my son's mother-in-law of wearing a fake heirloom would cost me the only family dinner invitation I'd get that year, and probably every year after. So I let it go. For 12 months. I let it go. I repaired watches. I ate alone. I walked to the bakery on McLean Avenue on Saturday mornings and bought a roll I didn't need because it gave me a reason to say good morning to another human being. I did not think about the bracelet. I did not think about the way the stone had passed light like window glass. I did not think about it the way you don't think about a crack in the foundation. You just step over it every day until the floor gives out. But my hands didn't shake when I held that bracelet at the birthday party. They shook when I gave it back. And they shook again the morning I drove to Scarsdale for Thanksgiving, pulled into Garrett's driveway, and saw Vivica climbing out of a town car wearing that same bracelet on her wrist. This time she wasn't inviting me to examine it. This time she turned her wrist away the moment she saw me looking. I ironed my one good shirt 3 times that morning. Once for the wrinkles, twice for the nerve. The memory of the birthday party, the bracelet, the chandelier light, the wrongness I couldn't name had stayed with me all night and into the morning. It was a small thing, the kind most people wouldn't notice. But I'd spent 41 years noticing small things in stones. And people aren't much different. You hide what you're afraid someone will see. I laid the shirt flat on the kitchen counter because I don't own an ironing board. Navy blue. Still decent at the collar. I put on the gray wool coat, the only winter coat I have, and placed the velvet box on the passenger seat of my car. Inside it was my wife's brooch. I'd spent 6 weeks restoring it at my workbench, resetting 2 loose garnets, polishing the silver frame until it caught light the way she used to catch a room. It was for Theo. My grandson had never met her, and this was the closest I could bring them together. The Sawmill River Parkway was empty at 10 in the morning. Bare November oaks lined both sides, their branches stripped clean and reaching over the road like hands with nothing left to hold. 22 minutes door to door. That's the distance between Yonkers and Scarsdale. 22 minutes and an entire tax bracket. I rehearsed on the drive. Smile when greeted, compliment the food. Don't mention the shop. Don't mention the apartment. Don't mention that my son hasn't visited in 4 months. Don't look at the bracelet. Especially don't look at the bracelet. The gas station coffee had gone cold by the time I pulled into the driveway. Garrett's house sat back from the road, a colonial with black shutters and a lawn that someone else mowed. 2 cars were already there, Garrett's Audi and a town car I recognized as Vivica's. I took the velvet box from the passenger seat and slipped it into the inner pocket of my coat next to my chest. Then I walked to the front door, carrying a foil-covered dish of sweet potatoes, and the particular kind of quiet a man learns when the person who insults him lives in the same house as the grandchild he drove 22 minutes to hold. Garrett opened the door. My son, 38. An operations manager who ran a logistics company's northeast corridor but couldn't manage a sentence to his own father without checking the room first. He smiled the way he'd been smiling at me for years, warm enough to pass, thin enough to see through. Dad, hey, come in. Let me take that. Behind him, Sloane Prescott Caldwell appeared in the hallway. 35 years old. An interior design coordinator, whose own home looked like it had been staged for a magazine cover. She held a glass of white wine at 11 in the morning and offered me the kind of smile that arrives prepackaged, pleasant, correct, and empty of everything that matters. Happy Thanksgiving, Vernon. Garrett. Take his dish. I handed over the sweet potatoes. Before I could step across the threshold, a voice came from the living room, clear, pitched to carry, and aimed with the precision of someone who'd been planning the line since she heard my car in the driveway. "Vernon, that coat." Vivica emerged from the archway, champagne flute in hand, head tilted at the angle people use when they're pretending to admire something they actually find amusing. "Is it vintage, or is that what we're calling goodwill now?" The foyer went still. Not silent, the oven hummed. Something simmered on the stove. A football announcer murmured from the living room television, but the human sound stopped. Sloane looked at her wine. Garrett studied his shoes. I didn't answer. Not because I had nothing to say, because the thing I wanted to say would have ended Thanksgiving before the turkey came out of the oven. So I did what I've always done in this house. I swallowed it. I pressed the velvet box deeper into my coat pocket with one finger, feeling the brooch through the fabric. And I stepped inside. "Good to see you too, Vivica," I said. Garrett leaned close as he hung my coat in the hallway closet. "Mom's been cooking since 6. Dad," he whispered, "just go with the flow today, okay?" Go with the flow. That's what my son said to me. Not, "I'm sorry she talks to you that way," not, "I'll say something." Go with the flow, as if his father's dignity were a scheduling inconvenience. I stepped into the foyer and the smell layered over me. Roasted turkey, cinnamon from something baking, and underneath it, sharp and chemical, the scent of new leather. 3 designer handbags sat by the staircase, price tags still attached. For a woman who told Garrett last month she was tightening her belt, Vivica Prescott was spending like someone who'd just come into money she couldn't explain. I've spent 41 years reading the things people hide inside beautiful settings. You'd be surprised how often the flaw is in the clasp, not the stone. The handbags by the staircase stayed with me as I moved through the house. 3 of them, tags on, leather so new it still smelled like a factory floor. Vivica had told Garrett last month that she was cutting back. That was the word she used, cutting back. The bags told a different story. And I wasn't the only one in the house who could read it. I wandered toward the kitchen looking for a glass of water. Nobody had offered me one. Nobody had offered me anything since I walked in. Not a drink, not a seat, not a place to stand that didn't feel borrowed. The kitchen was at the end of a hallway lined with family photographs, and I noticed that not a single one included me. That's when I heard Vivica. She was pressed against the wall just past the kitchen doorway, her back to me, phone tight against her ear. Her voice was low and urgent, the kind of whisper that tries to be quiet but can't keep the panic out of the consonants. "Handle the paperwork before anyone notices," she said. "I don't care what it costs, just get it done before January." I stopped walking. She must have felt the air shift behind her, because she turned mid-sentence and saw me standing 6 feet away with an empty glass in my hand. For half a second no longer, her eyes went wide with the kind of raw fear I'd only ever seen in people caught doing something they couldn't explain. Then the mask snapped back. She ended the call without saying goodbye. "Charity board nonsense," she said, straightening her collar. "You wouldn't understand. It's a world that requires connections." Here's what 41 years behind a jeweler's loop teaches you. People protect their secrets the same way they protect their valuables, by making sure you never get close enough to see the scratch marks. Vivica's voice said charity. Her eyes said cornered animal. And her knuckles, still white around the phone, said whatever that call was about had nothing to do with galas or donor lists. I filled my glass at the kitchen sink and said nothing. She watched me drink it like I was a witness she needed to discredit. "You really should mingle, Vernon," she said on her way out. "Standing alone in kitchens is how rumors start." I let her go. I had enough to think about already. Back in the living room, I found the second performance of the afternoon. Sloane sat on the edge of the sectional sofa, phone in both hands, thumbs moving in rapid bursts across the screen. Every few seconds, Garrett drifted past, refilling a drink, adjusting a napkin ring, finding reasons to circle the room, and every time he came within 5 feet of her, Sloane pressed the phone flat against her thigh and looked up with a smile that arrived 2 beats too late. "Everything okay?" Sloane Garrett asked, pausing behind the couch. "You've been on that phone all morning." "Just the caterer confirming dessert," she said. "Relax." "A caterer doesn't make your hands shake when you type." "I noticed because I notice things. It's the only skill I have left that nobody can take from me." But Garrett noticed too. My son was 38 years old, and he was rubbing the back of his neck the way he used to at 12 when he'd broken something in the house and hadn't decided whether to confess. He looked at Sloane the way a man looks at a door he's afraid to open, knowing what's behind it, hoping he's wrong, already rehearsing how to live with what he finds. I sat in the leather armchair by the window. The cushion was cold and stiff beneath my expensive furniture that nobody actually sat in. I ran my fingertips along the armrest and catalogued what I'd seen in less than an hour. Vivica whispering about paperwork with panic in her eyes. Sloane guarding her phone like classified intelligence. Garrett circling the room like a man locked out of his own marriage. 3 people keeping 3 different secrets in the same house. And I was the only one with nothing to hide. Then Vivica walked in from the hallway, shoulders back, bracelet catching the chandelier light. She held her wrist up and announced it was time to sit down for dinner. The stones flashed as she gestured toward the dining room, and everyone admired them. The way you're supposed to admire things that expensive in houses like this. Everyone except me. Because this time, I wasn't looking at the stone. I was looking at the way she held her arm. Not like a woman showing off a family heirloom. Like a woman daring someone to call her bluff. There were place cards at the table, handwritten in Sloane's careful cursive, as if the seating arrangement were a dinner party and not a sentencing. I didn't accept Vivica's dare. When she held that bracelet under the chandelier and let the stones catch the light, I kept my eyes on the tablecloth. I wasn't ready to look yet, not because I was afraid of what I'd see, but because I was afraid of what I'd say. Some truths need a better audience than a Thanksgiving table. Vivica walked us through the dining room like a docent in a museum. Turkey carved and fanned on a platter, candles lit at measured intervals, linen napkins folded into shapes I didn't know napkins could make. And the bracelet. Always the bracelet. Catching chandelier light on her wrist as she gestured toward each setting. 3 generations of Prescott women have worn this piece, she announced, to no one in particular. Appraised at $85,000, though of course the sentimental value is beyond price. She said the number the way a soldier says the caliber of his rifle, not to inform, but to remind you what it could do to you. I found my place card at the far end of the table, past the centerpiece, past the candles, past the salt and pepper shakers that mark the border between family and guest. Vivica saw me pick it up and tilted her head with that smile of hers, the one that has all the right muscles but none of the warmth. "You're down at the end, Vernon." We kept the center seats for immediate family. She paused just long enough for the word to land. "I'm sure you understand." I understood perfectly. She wasn't seating me at the end of a table. She was seating me outside the family. And Garrett, my son, seated 3 chairs away in the center where Vivica had placed him, looked at his napkin and said nothing. I pulled out the chair. I sat down. I curled my fingers around the edge of the place card with my name on it and bent it slightly before setting it face down. Then I waited for the meal to begin, alone at my end of a table in a house I'd helped pay for. with a dry mouth because nobody had thought to offer me a glass of water in the 2 hours since I'd arrived. That's when I heard the chair. The sound of wooden legs scraping across hard wood cut through the polite murmur of the room like a car alarm in a library. Everyone turned. Theo Caldwell, 10 years old, my grandson, with his grandfather's watchful eyes and a tablet clutched under one arm, was dragging his chair from the center of the table toward my end. He did it without asking permission. He did it the way children do things before adults teach them to be ashamed of what they want. "I'm sitting with Grandpa," he announced. A 10-year-old boy dragged a chair across a hardwood floor in a house worth more than everything I'd ever owned. And for the first time all day, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Sloane stood up from her seat. "Theo, your seat is over here. Mrs. Whitfield said to document something real," Theo said, settling into the chair beside me and propping his tablet against the flower arrangement. "Grandpa's real." The table went quiet. Not the hostile quiet of Vivica's insults, a different kind. The kind where adults realize a child has just said something they can't argue with, and it makes them uncomfortable because they know he's right. Theo adjusted the tablet's angle once, twice, then tapped the screen. A red dot appeared in the corner. He was recording something for a school project, he'd told Sloane. His fourth-grade teacher, Mrs. Whitfield, had assigned a video about family traditions. Theo had decided his tradition was his grandfather. The screen framed the hallway behind us. I could see it in the reflection of the coat rack by the front door, the corridor leading to the kitchen, the closet where Garrett had hung my coat when I arrived. Everything that would happen in that hallway for the rest of the evening would be captured on a 10-year-old school tablet. Theo didn't know what he was recording. He just knew he wanted his grandfather in the frame. Nobody at the table gave the tablet a second glance. Vivica was already turning back to her centerpiece arrangement. Sloane had resumed her seat with pressed lips. Garrett was pouring wine for everyone except the end of the table where I sat. I put my hand on Theo's shoulder. He leaned into it the way children lean into the things that feel safe. "Thank you, buddy," I said. "You're welcome, Grandpa," he said. "Now tell me something interesting before the turkey gets cold. Have you ever watched someone sharpen a knife at a dinner table? Not a real knife, but every word they choose, angled just right to cut without leaving a mark anyone else can see." Theo's tablet glowed quietly at the end of the table, its red recording dot steady and ignored. The soup arrived. Butternut squash, handmade, served in bowls that probably cost more than my weekly grocery run. I picked up my spoon and let the first course settle the room into the false calm that precedes the real meal in houses like this. The real meal isn't food, it's conversation. And Vivica Prescott had been planning the menu all day. She started with careers. Not directly, she was too skilled for that. She began by asking Garrett about a promotion at the logistics firm, then pivoted to Sloane's latest design contract, letting each answer build a staircase of accomplishment that led to only one destination. Me. "And Vernon," she said, turning with the chandelier light catching the bracelet on her wrist. "What are you working on these days? Still tinkering?" "Tinkering." She chose the word the way a jeweler chooses a setting precisely, for maximum effect. "I'm restoring a pocket watch," I said. "A Hamilton, 1940s. For a client. For myself." Vivica's lips pressed together in something that wanted to be a smile but couldn't quite commit. "Tinkering for pennies," she said to the table, not to me. "I suppose there's a charm to it. The way there's a charm to covered bridges. Quaint. But you wouldn't raise a family on quaint, would you? Let me tell you something about people who mock your work. They never mock the result, only the labor. because the labor reminds them of something they've never had to do. Vivica Prescott had never worked with her hands a day in her life. She'd organized events, managed caterers, directed florists and decorators the way a general directs troops from a safe distance, with someone else doing the bleeding. Sloane stirred her soup. "Mom, that's enough." She said it the way you close a screen door in a hurricane. Technically the right motion, completely useless against the wind. Vivica didn't even acknowledge her daughter. She was looking at Theo now. And that's when I understood. The insults weren't aimed at me. They were aimed at the space between me and my grandson. She was trying to shrink me in his eyes, to turn the man he'd dragged a chair across the floor to sit next to into someone not worth the effort. Garrett cut his bread in half. He did not look up. He did not speak. I set my spoon down. The soup was rich rosemary cream, a hint of nutmeg, the kind of food I ate maybe once a year, and the bitter irony of being served something this good by someone who thought this little of me wasn't lost. But I didn't let it sit. I did what I've always done when someone tries to make my work small. I made it real. "I once fixed a pocket watch for a woman named Dorothy," I said. My voice was quiet, but in a room that silent, quiet carries. Her husband had died wearing it. Heart attack on a Tuesday morning. The watch stopped the same minute he did. She brought it to me in a paper bag and asked if I could make it tick again. Nobody moved. Even the candle flames seemed to hold still. It took me 3 weeks. The mainspring was seized, the crystal was cracked, and the hands had bent when they hit the floor with him. But I rebuilt it, every gear, every pivot, by hand. And when she came to pick it up, I wound it in front of her and held it to her ear. I paused. Theo was watching me the way children watch when they know something important is happening but don't have the words for it yet. "She started crying," I said. "She told me I'd given her back the last sound he ever heard. The ticking." She held that watch against her chest and she said, "It sounds like him." That was worth more than pennies to her. It was worth more than anything in this room. The table went quiet after that. Even Vivica's fork paused mid-air, a piece of bread suspended between the plate and her mouth. For 3 full seconds. Nobody spoke. Theo's eyes were wide, his soup forgotten, looking at me like I'd just shown him something no classroom could teach. But the silence didn't last. It never does with people like her. Vivica set her fork down. She looked at Theo. She smiled the kind of smile that uses every muscle in the face except the ones connected to the heart. And she said something I will never forget as long as I live. She said it looking directly at my grandson, and it was the cruelest thing anyone had ever said to me. Not because of what it meant, but because of who she wanted to hear it. "Theo, sweetheart," Vivica said, her voice dripping with the kind of sweetness that makes your teeth ache. "Do you want to end up fixing broken things in a closet when you grow up? Or do you want to matter?" She said it with a smile. She said it looking directly at my grandson. And she said it in a room where every adult heard it, and not one of them opened their mouth. I didn't respond to her. I didn't look at her. I didn't give her the satisfaction of watching me flinch. Instead, I reached into the inner pocket of my jacket, the one hanging on the back of my chair, and pulled out the velvet box I'd been carrying since Yonkers. "Theo," I said quietly, "I brought you something." He turned away from Vivica the way sunlight turns a corner, naturally, without effort, toward the thing that's warm. I opened the box. Inside, resting on cream-colored satin, was his grandmother's brooch, sterling silver frame, 2 garnets and a small sapphire. The clasp rebuilt from scratch by my own hands over 6 weeks at the workbench. It wasn't worth a fortune. It was worth something better. It was real. Theo's eyes went wide. He reached for it carefully. The way I'd taught him to handle things that matter, with both hands, with intention. "This was your grandma's," I said. "I restored it for you. The stones are original, every one of them." Teaching a child to see truth in a stone is the same as teaching them to see truth in a person. Hold it to the light and watch what it does with what it's given. I tilted the brooch under the candlelight and showed him. "See how the garnet breaks the light, scatters it in every direction. A real stone fights the light, bends it, throws it around like it can't be contained. A fake one is too perfect, too polite. The light goes straight through, clean and easy, because there's nothing inside to resist it." Theo turned the brooch slowly in his small hands, watching the garnets throw tiny red sparks across the tablecloth. "Is Grandma's brooch real?" he whispered. "Every piece of it," I said. I made sure of that myself. "I'll remember," he said. And I believed him, because children don't say things like that unless they mean them. They haven't learned yet how to promise without intending to keep it. The table was silent. Not the hostile silence of before, something different. Something that happens when a room full of people watches a man do something kind in the face of someone who is trying to be cruel. And they realize the kind thing won. For a moment, even Garrett looked up from his bread. Vivica couldn't stand it. She'd been ignored. She'd aimed her best shot at the space between me and my grandson. And the boy had turned away from her to hold a brooch that cost less than the napkin rings on her table. That's the thing about cruelty delivered in public when it doesn't land. The person who threw it is the one left holding it. "Vernon," she said, and her voice had shifted. Harder now. No more sweetness. "Tell us, what is it actually like? 1 bedroom, a pension, eating alone? I genuinely want to understand how that works." The table went still again. Sloane looked at her wine. Garrett looked at his plate. Theo looked at me. "It works the same way anything works, Vivica," I said. I kept my voice steady. I owed myself that. "You get up. You do honest work. And you—" The scream cut through the dining room like a fire alarm in a church. Sudden, violent. Designed to make every person at the table stop thinking and start reacting. Vivica was staring at her wrist. Her left hand was gripping the edge of the table, and her right wrist was bare. The bracelet. The heirloom she'd been parading all evening. The one she'd announced the value of before the soup was served. Was gone. "My bracelet!" she screamed. "It's gone! It was right here! It was on my wrist!" Her chair shot backward, legs scraping against hardwood. She stood, spinning, scanning the tablecloth, the floor, the seat cushion. The wine in my mouth went sour the instant she screamed, and I set the glass down without swallowing. Every head at the table turned. Vivica's eyes swept the room past Sloane, past Garrett, past the half-carved turkey and the guttering candles and the empty plates, past her own daughter, past her own son-in-law, until they landed on me, the only person at the table who didn't belong to her family. The man with the 1-bedroom apartment and the pension and the hands that knew things about stones that nobody else in the room could understand. She looked at me the way a prosecutor looks at a defendant before the verdict. And the room, my son's room, in my son's house, let her. I have been accused of many things in 68 years. Stubbornness, silence, working too much and talking too little. But never in my life has someone looked at me the way Vivica Prescott looked at me across that dining table, and decided in front of my son, my grandson, and her own daughter that I was a thief. She didn't say the word. Not yet. She was too smart for that. What she did was worse. She built it.
"Let's all stay calm," she said, pressing both palms flat on the tablecloth, like a judge calling order. Her voice was measured, deliberate, each word placed like a stone in a wall she was constructing around me. The bracelet was on my wrist 20 minutes ago. It didn't walk off the table by itself. So let's think about this logically. Logically. She said that word the way a locksmith says tumblers, knowing exactly which one to turn. "Who left their seat during dinner?" she asked the table. Nobody answered. Sloane looked at her wine. Garrett looked at his plate. Theo gripped the brooch under the table with both hands, and I felt his knee press against mine. Not because he understood what was happening, but because he could feel it. "Who walked past the hallway?" Vivica continued. "Who would know how to unclasp a piece like that without the wearer noticing?" Each question was a door closing. Each silence was a lock turning. And every person at the table sat there and let her build the case, brick by brick, as if watching a house go up around someone else made it somebody else's problem. Let me tell you what it feels like to be framed by someone smarter than the room. It feels like drowning in a pool where everyone is watching and nobody thinks you need help. Because the water looks so calm from where they're sitting. Vivica turned to me. She'd save the eye contact for last, the way a good prosecutor saves the defendant for the closing argument. "You appraised jewelry for 41 years, Vernon," she said. Not a question, a statement, a verdict delivered as a fact. "You'd know exactly how to handle a clasp without anyone feeling a thing. You'd know the value down to the last cent, and you'd know." She paused, letting the silence do the cutting. "That a piece like that could change your life." I placed both hands flat on the table. Steady. Not because I wasn't angry, I was furious. The kind of fury that burns so hot it feels cold. But because the steadiest thing a man can do when the world is trying to make him look guilty is refuse to shake. "I didn't take your bracelet, Vivica," I said. "Nobody said you did," she replied. "I'm just asking questions." But she wasn't asking questions. She was giving answers and dressing them up in question marks. And the room was accepting them because it was easier to suspect the man at the end of the table than to question the woman at the center of it. My son wouldn't look at me. Not because he believed her, because not looking was easier than choosing a side. Garrett sat 3 chairs away, with his hands around his water glass, running the back of his neck with the other hand, the way he always does when something is breaking and he doesn't want to see it. He knew what was happening. He knew it was wrong. And he sat there anyway. Theo saw it. I know he did, because his knee pressed harder against mine. And when I glanced down, his knuckles were white around the brooch I'd just given him, holding on to the real thing, while the room filled up with everything fake. Sloane nodded along to her mother's questions, like a backing vocalist who doesn't need to carry the tune but knows when to hum. She hadn't said a word since the scream. She didn't need to. Her silence was agreement. And in a room like this, agreement is all it takes. The candles had burned low. The food sat untouched and cooling. The acrid smell of wax mixed with the rosemary turkey that nobody was eating anymore. And the wine I'd been sipping had turned to vinegar on my tongue. Vivica stood up straight. She smoothed her blouse. And then she delivered the line she'd been building toward since the first question. "Your father's coat is hanging in the hallway." "Garrett?" Her voice was perfectly calm. Rehearsed calm. The calm of a woman who already knew exactly what they would find. "If the bracelet isn't there, I'll apologize on my knees." She said it looking at my son. And my son. My only son. The boy I closed my shop to educate stood up from his chair, pushed it back from the table, and walked toward the hallway. He did not look at me. He did not look back. She didn't wait for Garrett.
She pushed past him in the hallway, grabbed my coat off the rack with both hands, and held it up like a carcass she intended to gut. I followed them out of the dining room. So did Sloane. So did Theo, still clutching the brooch, pressed against the hallway wall with wide eyes. We stood in a corridor barely wide enough for 4 adults. The coat that had hung there since I arrived, the same gray wool Vivica had mocked 2 hours ago, was now the centerpiece of a trial I didn't know I was standing in. Vivica searched the outer pockets first. Left side, nothing. Right side, a gas station receipt and a cough drop. She held each item up for the room like exhibits, then dropped them on the hallway table. She was taking her time. She was performing. She searched those pockets the way a magician handles a hat, not looking for the rabbit, but making sure the audience is watching when it appears. Then she reached inside. The breast pocket. The one where I'd carried the velvet box with the brooch that morning. The one I'd emptied at the dinner table when I gave Theo his grandmother's jewelry. Her fingers closed around something. I saw it in her face before she pulled it out. Not surprise, not relief, not even triumph. Confirmation. The expression of a woman who was finding exactly what she had put there. She pulled the bracelet out slowly, letting the hallway light catch the stones as they emerged from the wool. She held it between 2 fingers, arm extended, dangling it so every person in that corridor could see it swinging. "Well," she said. Her voice was quiet now. The screaming was over. She didn't need volume anymore. She had proof. "There it is, in the pocket of the only man at this table who fixes jewelry for a living." The bracelet swung like a pendulum. The stones caught the overhead light and threw it against the hallway walls in tiny, fractured patterns. And even in that moment, even standing there with my empty coat turned inside out and my family staring at me, the appraiser in me noticed. The light was too clean, too even. The same wrongness I'd seen at the birthday party a year ago. The same wrongness I'd tried to bury for 12 months. But I couldn't think about that now. Not with every eye in the hallway aimed at me like a firing squad. "I did not take that bracelet," I said. My voice was steady. My hands hung open at my sides, palms out, fingers unclenched. The posture of a man with nothing to hide. The taste of copper flooded my mouth. Adrenaline and injustice mixing on my tongue. But I kept my voice level, because I knew that the first person to raise theirs would be the one the room remembered as guilty. "I want you to understand something. When a room full of people goes silent after you say, 'I didn't do it,' the silence isn't neutral. The silence has already made up its mind. It's just waiting for someone to say what everyone is thinking. The bracelet disagrees." "Vernon," Viveca said. She hadn't lowered her arm. The bracelet still swung between us. "It was in your coat. Your coat. What would you call that?" "I would call it impossible," I said, "because I never touched it." "Impossible," she repeated, as though tasting the word and finding it ridiculous. She looked at Garrett. She looked at Sloane. She looked at the bracelet. Then she looked back at me with the satisfied expression of a woman who had just closed every door in the room. The smell of my own apartment drifted up from the crumpled coat metal polish. Old wool. The faint cedar of the closet where it usually hangs. My life. Reduced to a scent. Released into a hallway that smelled like money and candle wax and accusation. Garrett stood 3 feet away. His face was white. His hands were at his sides, mirroring mine, but his were shaking. He could have said one word. He could have said, "Wait." He could have said, "Dad." He could have stepped between Viveca and me, the way a son is supposed to step between his father and the world when the world is wrong. Instead, he turned to Viveca, and he said 6 words that I will carry with me to my grave. 6 words that told me everything I needed to know about who my son had become and who he had chosen to be.
Let me talk to him first. Let me talk to him first. Those were the 6 words my son chose. Not wait. Not, there must be a mistake. Not, that's my father you're accusing. He said, let me talk to him first, as though I were a problem to manage, not a person to defend. Garrett took my arm and guided me down the hallway to the guest bathroom. He closed the door behind us. The room was small. Barely enough space for the 2 of us, with lavender hand soap on the counter and an air freshener plugged into the wall that smelled like someone's idea of a garden. The artificial cleanliness of a room nobody uses, kept spotless for appearances. My son stood between me and the door. His reflection floated in the mirror behind me, pale, tight-jawed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Dad," he whispered. "Just say you picked it up by mistake." I stared at him. A moment of confusion. He continued, his voice cracking at the edges. "You saw it on the table. You picked it up without thinking. You put it in your pocket out of habit. It happens. Nobody has to call anyone. We move on." He said we as if we were on the same side. We were not on the same side. He was standing between me and the door, asking me to confess to a crime I didn't commit so that his Thanksgiving could end quietly. I paid for this boy's education by closing my shop. I sold the only thing I was good at, so he could become something better than me. I let go of Caldwell & Son Jewelers, the counter, the display cases, the lease I'd held for 22 years. So that Garrett could get a degree and a title and a house in Scarsdale with black shutters and a wife whose mother wore bracelets that cost more than my car. And now he was standing in a bathroom asking me to sell the only thing I had left. My name. "You're asking me to confess to stealing," I said. My voice was low, steady. The steadiness cost me everything I had. In front of my grandson. "You understand that's what you're asking. I'm asking you to make this go away. Dad, by lying, by choosing your battles." "This isn't a battle, Garrett. This is the truth. I didn't take that bracelet. It was put in my coat by someone in this house. And you're asking me to say otherwise so you don't have to find out who." He flinched. Not at the accusation, at the possibility. Because the possibility meant that someone he lived with, someone he shared a bed with or broke bread with or trusted to raise his son, had done something monstrous. And my son, at 38, had already decided that not knowing was safer than knowing. How do you explain to your child that the worst thing that ever happened to you wasn't a stranger accusing you of theft, it was your own son handing you the words to confess? Standing in a bathroom that smelled like lavender and asking you to say you stole something so he wouldn't have to choose between his father and his wife's family. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. Every syllable. Because the truth shouldn't have to fight this hard to be heard by your own blood. "Dad, please," Garrett said. His eyes were wet. "I'm trying to protect you." "You're trying to protect yourself," I said. "There's a difference. And you know there's a difference." He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. His reflection in the mirror did the same. 2 versions of my son, both failing to find the words. "Who are you believing right now?" I asked. "Because if you have to think about the answer, you've already given it." Garrett looked down at the tile floor. White hexagons, perfectly grouted. The kind of floor that costs money to look simple. He stared at it for a long time, and he said nothing. Nothing. That was his answer. The silence of a man who knew his father was innocent and couldn't afford to say so. I put my hand flat against the bathroom door.
The wood was smooth and cold under my palm. I pushed it open and walked back into the hallway. Vivica was waiting. The bracelet was in one hand, her phone was in the other, screen already lit.
"I'm calling the police," she said.
I looked at her, at the bracelet dangling from her fingers, at the phone poised like a weapon, at the hallway behind her where my coat hung empty and inside out on the rack. "Good," I said. "Call them." Have you ever watched someone dial a number they were sure would destroy you and felt nothing but relief? Vivica's thumb hovered over the screen. She'd expected me to crumble after the bathroom. She'd expected Garrett to walk me back into the hallway with my head down and an apology on my lips. Instead, I was standing in front of her, with my hands at my sides and a calm she hadn't planned for. "Last chance, Vernon," she said. "Confess now or I call." I said, "Call them, Vivica. I'll wait right here." I kept my voice even, not loud, not pleading. The voice I use when I testified in insurance cases, measured, precise. The voice of a man who has spent 41 years separating truth from imitation. I've got nothing to hide, and 4 decades of knowing what real evidence looks like. The hallway seemed to shrink. Vivica stood at one end with the phone glowing in her hand and the bracelet clutched in the other. Garrett stood behind me, his shadow motionless against the wall. From the dining room, I could hear nothing Sloane and Theo, waiting in a silence so thick it had its own weight. Vivica's eyes narrowed. The phone was supposed to be a weapon. The threat of police. The threat of public humiliation. The threat of a 68-year-old man being led out of his son's house in front of his grandson. All of it was supposed to break me. But a weapon only works if the person you're pointing it at is afraid. And I was done being afraid in this house. Let me tell you something about people who threaten to call the police. The ones who announce it loudest are the ones who need you to stop them. Because calling the police means strangers asking questions. It means statements on the record. It means someone with a badge and no loyalty to anyone in the room, looking at the facts without the family script. Vivica didn't want facts. She wanted surrender. "Are you going to let him talk to me like that in my daughter's house?" she said, turning to Garrett. Garrett said nothing. He was still in the bathroom, not physically, but in every way that mattered. He'd asked me to confess, and I'd refused. And now he was standing in the hallway like a man who'd been asked to choose between 2 fires and decided to just stand still and burn. "Call them," I said again. "But before you do, put that bracelet down on the table. Don't wipe it, don't wrap it in anything. Set it down exactly as it is." Vivica blinked. "Excuse me?" "And nobody opens that coat closet again until an officer is standing in this hallway. Don't touch the coat, don't move the hangers, don't rearrange anything." "You don't give orders in this house," she said. But her voice had lost its edge. The commanding tone from the dining room was gone. In its place was something thinner, something that sounded for the first time all evening uncertain. "I'm not giving orders," I said. "I'm preserving evidence. There's a difference. And the police will know it even if you don't." 41 years of handling stones teaches you one thing above all else. The truth doesn't need you to defend it. It just needs you to stop letting people bury it. And right now, in this hallway, with my coat turned inside out, and a bracelet that someone had planted in my pocket, the most important thing I could do was make sure nothing else was moved, wiped, or hidden before someone official walked through that front door. Vivica stared at me. I watched the calculation happen behind her eyes. The rapid rebalancing of a woman who had planned for a broken old man and gotten something else entirely. She hadn't expected procedure. She hadn't expected someone who knew what chain of custody meant, who had sat in courtrooms and explained to juries how evidence gets contaminated and why it matters. She set the bracelet down on the hallway table, not because I asked, because she had no choice left.
The overhead light caught the stones as they settled against the dark wood. And there it was. The thing I'd noticed at the birthday party. The thing I buried for 12 months. The thing I'd seen again when she pulled it from my coat and I was too shocked to process. The light passed through the center stone too cleanly, too politely. No scatter, no fight, no fire. The way light only moves through glass. I said nothing. Not yet. Because a good appraiser never reveals his findings to the person who might be responsible for the fraud. I just stood there, hands steady, watching the bracelet sit on the table under the hallway light. And I knew two things with absolute certainty. I didn't steal that bracelet, and that bracelet wasn't worth stealing. I still hadn't said a word about the stones. The truth is a tool. You don't hand it to someone before you know exactly what they'll do with it. I stood in that hallway with a secret worth more than the bracelet they were accusing me of stealing. And I held it the way I've held every valuable thing in my life, carefully, patiently, waiting for the right moment. Vivica had gone into the living room to make the call. I could hear her voice through the wall, clipped, performative. The voice of a woman narrating her own emergency for maximum effect. Garrett found me in the kitchen. He'd changed tactics. The bathroom had been whispers and pleading. This was something harder. He stood on the other side of the island, hands flat on the marble, leaning toward me like a man negotiating a deal he couldn't afford to lose. Dad, the police are coming. This is real now. His voice was raw. Just tell them you were confused. You saw it, you picked it up, you forgot. I'll handle the rest. You keep saying handle, I said. I filled a glass of water from the tap, because my mouth was dry, and because I needed something to do with my hands that wasn't making fists. What does that word mean to you, Garrett? Because to me, it means you've already decided I did it. I'm trying to protect you. You're trying to protect the evening. When did my son learn that the fastest way to solve a problem was to sacrifice the person who didn't fight back? Was it at Fordham, where I paid the tuition? Was it at the logistics company, where he learned to route around obstacles instead of facing them? Or was it here, in this kitchen, in this marriage, in this house, where the path of least resistance always led through his father? The kitchen faucet dripped. A slow, steady tick against the stainless steel, counting seconds neither of us wanted to fill. Untouched plates sat stacked by the sink. Thanksgiving dinner abandoned mid-course. The food cooling into something nobody would eat. The smell of dish soap and cold gravy mixed in the air. Dad, listen to me, Garrett said. He came around the island. He was close now. Close enough that I could see the vein pulsing at his temple, the way it used to pulse when he was a teenager lying about where he'd been on a Friday night. I can make this go away. I'll talk to Vivica. I'll pay for any damage. We can call it a misunderstanding, and nobody has to... Nobody has to what? I set the glass down on the counter. The water was flat and tasteless, and it matched the hollowness of standing in my son's kitchen, listening to him build a cage out of kindness. Nobody has to know your father was innocent. Nobody has to ask who actually put that bracelet in my coat. He flinched. I built my life one honest assessment at a time. Every stone I ever graded. I told the truth about, even when the truth cost me the client. Even when a generous rating would have kept the lights on for another month. I closed my shop. I sold my cases. I ate soup alone in a one-bedroom apartment so my son could become something better than me. But I never lied about a stone. Not once. And I was not about to start now. Not in a kitchen in Scarsdale. Not for my own son. I will not confess to what I did not do, I said. Not for you, not for her, not to make this dinner end quietly.
Garrett's hands dropped to his sides.
"You want to protect me?" I said. "Then stand next to me when they get here. That's protection. Everything else is just choosing sides." The kitchen went quiet. The faucet dripped. Through the wall. Viveka's voice rose and fell in rehearsed distress. Somewhere in the dining room, Theo was sitting with a tablet and a brooch, and no idea that the adults around him were choosing who to throw away. "You're going to lose everything over this," Garrett whispered. He said it the way people say goodbye at a funeral. Not with anger, but with the resigned sadness of someone who has already done the math and decided the outcome. His father was the acceptable loss. The number that gets crossed off the ledger so the rest of the balance holds. Garrett stared at me for a long time. Then he straightened his collar, turned toward the hallway, and said over his shoulder, "Then I can't help you, Dad." The kitchen door swung shut behind him. I stood alone at the counter, with a glass of water and the truth, and neither one of them kept me company. Through the window above the sink, red and blue lights swept across the ceiling, painting the kitchen walls in colors that meant everything was about to change. The officer was polite. The lawyer who walked in behind him was not. I heard the front door open from the kitchen, the crunch of boots on the foyer tile. Viveka's voice shifting instantly from the shrill panic of the hallway to the composed distress of a woman giving a statement. I stepped into the doorway and watched. Officer Nolan Ramsey, 42. A Scarsdale patrol officer with a clipboard and a careful, unhurried manner that suggested he'd seen family disputes before. Stood in the foyer taking notes. He had a pen in one hand and an expression that said he'd rather be anywhere else on Thanksgiving night. He was asking Viveka basic questions. When did she last see the item? Who was present? Had anything been moved when the front door opened again? Boyd Wainwright walked in like he owned the house. 45 years old. The Prescott family's estate attorney. Tall. Cashmere coat still dusted with November cold. Leather briefcase in one hand. He didn't knock. He didn't wait to be introduced. He crossed the foyer in 3 strides, extended his hand to Ramsey, and started talking before anyone could ask who he was. "Officer, I'm Boyd Wainwright. I handle the Prescott family's estate matters. I can walk you through the asset's provenance and insured value, if that would expedite things." He didn't ask what happened. He already knew the story he wanted to tell. And he'd arrived less than 20 minutes after Viveka's call on Thanksgiving night, in a cashmere coat, with a briefcase. Nobody drives to Scarsdale on a holiday that fast without being on standby. I've met men like Boyd Wainwright my entire career. Men who appraise people the way I appraise stones, calculating what they're worth and what they can be sold for. He looked at me once as he entered. The kind of look you give a piece of furniture you plan to move. And then he looked away. I wasn't a person to him. I was an obstacle between his client and a clean resolution. Boyd positioned himself next to Viveka and began constructing the narrative with the efficiency of a man who builds cases the way I build watch movements, precisely, with every component placed for maximum function. The bracelet was last seen on Mrs. Prescott's wrist during dinner, he told Ramsey. His cologne was sharp and expensive, cutting through the stale Thanksgiving air like a blade. It was subsequently found in Mr. Caldwell's coat pocket. Those are facts, not accusations, though the distinction may be academic. Ramsey's pen paused over his clipboard. He looked at Boyd, then at me, then back at Boyd. I could see him calibrating a patrol officer, weighing a family attorney's polish against the scene in front of him. "I'll need to speak with everyone individually," Ramsey said, "including Mr. Caldwell." "Of course," Boyd said. "We want full cooperation. That's why I'm here." Full cooperation. The words sounded generous. They were a leash. I clasped my hands behind my back and stood in the kitchen doorway, watching.
Not because I had nothing to say, but because in a room full of people performing, the person standing still sees everything the performers don't want seen. Nobody in that room was looking at Sloane. And that, I realized, was exactly the point. She was standing by the dining room archway, arms crossed, half in shadow. She hadn't spoken since the bracelet was found. She hadn't cried, hadn't gasped, hadn't done any of the things you'd expect from a woman whose mother's heirloom had just been pulled from a relative's pocket. She was watching Boyd the way you watch a tightrope walker, not with admiration, but with the particular tension of someone who knows what happens if he falls. Boyd turned toward her. "Sloane, you saw the bracelet on your mother's wrist at dinner, correct?" It was a simple question, a yes or no question. But Sloane's reaction wasn't simple. She looked away fast, involuntary, the way people avoid eye contact with someone who has power over them. Her chin dropped, her arms tightened across her chest. "Yes," she said, too quickly. "I already said that." That wasn't an answer. That was a door slamming shut. Boyd's expression flickered for half a second. A micro-adjustment, a tightening at the corner of his mouth that disappeared before anyone else could catch it. Then he turned back to Ramsey with a smooth summary of the bracelet's insurance history, and the moment was gone. But I kept watching Sloane. She had uncrossed her arms, her right hand slid into her cardigan pocket, and through the fabric I could see her thumb moving, scrolling. The soft click of a phone screen, barely audible under Boyd's confident baritone and the faint crackle of the police radio from the cruiser outside. She was deleting something, methodically, unhurried. And she was doing it while every eye in the room was pointed at me. Boyd made the mistake that would eventually unravel everything. He handed me the bracelet. I filed away what I'd seen Sloane doing, the scrolling thumb, the quiet deletion, and let it settle into the growing list of things I knew and hadn't said. Ramsey was asking Boyd about the item's documentation, and Boyd saw his opening. "Mr. Caldwell appraised this piece years ago," Boyd said, pulling the bracelet from the evidence bag. He held it up like a courtroom exhibit. "He can confirm what we're dealing with. $85,000. Officer? Officer?" It was a trap. He wanted me to hold the thing with hunger in my eyes and give Ramsey a number that made the theft charge stick. A retired appraiser, known financial difficulties. Caught with the goods now, confirming the value of what he supposedly coveted. Clean narrative, easy arrest. Ramsey looked at me. "Sir, can you confirm the item's value?" I held out my hand. Boyd placed the bracelet across my palm with a satisfied half smile. The way you hand a dog a treat before closing the gate. The weight was wrong. 41 years of holding stones against my fingertips. And the weight was wrong. A real diamond of that size and cut pulls differently against your skin. It has a specific gravity that settles into the hand like a small, cold truth. This stone sat too light, too cooperative, like a lie rehearsed until it almost sounds real. I tilted the bracelet toward the hallway light. The stone caught the beam and threw it back clean and even. Too clean. A real diamond fractures light, breaks a single beam into fire, scatters it into spectral color. This stone was transparent in a way diamonds never are. No fire, no resistance. The light went through it like water through a screen. A fake stone and a real one can sit side by side and the world won't know the difference. Not the jeweler on the corner. Not the woman wearing it. Not the insurance company. But if you've spent 41 years learning to read what light does when it meets carbon versus zirconium oxide, if your hands know the difference between a stone that pulls heat and one that sits cold and indifferent, you don't need a loop. You need 3 seconds and an honest light source. cubic zirconia. The setting was original, the clasp untouched, the platinum band undisturbed. Whoever swapped the stone had known their way around settings. But the stone was fake. And it hadn't been fake when I'd last held this bracelet. I turned it slowly, clicking the clasp. The metallic tang of a cheaper alloy reached my nose, sharper than I remembered. Another tell I said nothing about. Ramsey waited. Boyd waited. Vivica stood by the doorway with her arms folded, wearing an expression that wanted to be impatience, but was something else entirely. "Sir," Ramsey prompted, "I want you to understand what it costs to hold the truth in your hand and choose not to speak it. Not because you're afraid, not because you don't know the words, but because you've been in enough rooms to know that speaking too soon lets the guilty prepare their answers, and silence makes them prepare their escapes." "I can confirm this is the bracelet the family has been wearing," I said. Not what it was worth, not what it was made of, just what it was. Viveca's chin lifted. "Well, tell the officer what it's worth, Vernon." I looked at her. Not the way you look at someone across a dinner table. The way I used to look at a stone under magnification, reading every facet, every inclusion, every flaw beneath the polish. I held her gaze for 3 full seconds. "I think you already know what it's worth." Vivica. Her face cracked. 1 second. The corners of her mouth pulling down, her eyes widening a fraction. A flash of something between guilt and panic. That it was gone. Smoothed over like a scratch buffed out of glass. But I saw it. And she knew I saw it. "The insurance appraisal is on file." Boyd cut in too fast. "We don't need a verbal estimate tonight." I set the bracelet on the table with care, centering it on the wood like I was placing it in a display case. Then I stepped back. Boyd moved forward before Ramsey could reach for it. He scooped the bracelet off the table and wrapped it in a handkerchief from his breast pocket. "I'll secure this for the insurance file," he said, already tucking it into his briefcase. "That's evidence in a police matter, counselor, not insurance paperwork," Ramsey said, pen still moving across his clipboard. "I'll want it back before I leave tonight." Boyd nodded without quite meeting his eyes and latched the case. And I let it go. Because a man who rushes to hold on to evidence doesn't realize he's already shown you how much he needs it. Do you know what separates an innocent man from a guilty one in a room full of liars? The innocent one is the only person not performing. Boyd's briefcase was latched. The bracelet was inside it. And every person in that hallway had watched him take it without a word of objection, including Officer Ramsey, who was still writing notes as though a family attorney pocketing physical evidence on a holiday call was standard procedure. I let it go. I had something more important to do. While Boyd held court in the hallway, narrating a version of the evening that would have made a screenwriter blush, I stepped back through the dining room archway. Theo was sitting at the far end of the table, the brooch I'd given him still clutched in his small hand. He wasn't crying. He wasn't fidgeting. He was watching the doorway with the stillness of a boy who understood that the adults in his life were doing something wrong and didn't know how to stop it. I knelt beside him. My knees protested 68 years of gravity makes itself heard. But I got down to his level and kept my voice below the sound of Boyd's baritone carrying through the archway. "Theo, your tablet, the one you set up in the hallway, was it still recording?" His eyes widened. "I think so. I forgot to stop it when Grandma Vivica started yelling." "Good boy." I put my hand on his shoulder, brief and steady. "A promise. Go get it. Put it in your backpack and keep it safe for me. Can you do that?" He didn't ask why. He didn't ask what was on the video. He slid off the chair, crossed the dining room in his socked feet, and disappeared down the hall toward his bedroom. I heard the zipper of his Spider-Man backpack close. 30 seconds later. My grandson didn't need an explanation. When a child trusts you, they act on faith. When a family betrays you, no explanation they offer is ever enough. Theo came back and sat down at the table with his backpack on his lap, one hand on the zipper, and looked at me with the same expression I used to see in the mirror before walking into a difficult appraisal. Calm, serious, ready. I squeezed his shoulder once and went back to the hallway. Boyd hadn't noticed I'd been gone. He was leaning into Ramsey's space now, one hand gesturing toward the front door as though indicating a getaway route that didn't exist. Officer, with respect, the chain of custody is deteriorating by the minute. I'd recommend we formalize this tonight statement. Charges. The full process. Ramsey looked at him the way a mechanic looks at a customer explaining what's wrong with the engine. Patient, skeptical, unhurried. Mr. Wainwright, this is a family dispute on a holiday. Nobody's fleeing anywhere. Why would a lawyer drive to Scarsdale on Thanksgiving night to prosecute a missing bracelet unless the bracelet wasn't the thing he was really trying to protect? I watched Boyd recalibrate. His jaw tightened for a fraction of a second. Then the professional mask settled back into place. He turned to Vivica, who gave a small nod, the kind of nod that passes between people who have rehearsed their parts. Vivica, perhaps you'd like to give your formal statement now, Boyd said. Walk the officer through the evening, start to finish. But Garrett spoke first. Why are you pushing so hard? My son's voice was quiet, the words aimed directly at Boyd, not hostile, not defiant, just genuinely confused, in a way that cut through every polished sentence the attorney had delivered since walking through the door. It's a bracelet, Boyd, not a murder case. The hallway went still. Vivica's mouth opened and closed, Boyd's cologne cloying now in the closed space, mixing with the cold draft from the still open front door, seemed to thicken in the silence. Boyd recovered in 2 seconds. Garrett, I understand the emotional difficulty, but your father was found with an $85,000 asset in his coat. The law doesn't adjust for holidays. The law doesn't, Ramsey said mildly, clicking his pen. But I do. I'll take statements individually, starting with Mrs. Prescott. Boyd's mouth thinned. It was the second time in 10 minutes that Ramsey had declined to follow his script, and the frustration was beginning to show through the polish. Garrett caught my eye across the hallway. For the first time all evening, he didn't look away. He looked at Boyd, then back at me. And I saw something I hadn't seen since he was a boy, asking me to check for monsters under his bed. Doubt. Not doubt in me, doubt in the people standing next to him. My son looked at me the way drowning people look at shore. Not with hope, but with the terrible understanding of how far away safety really is. That look lasted 2 seconds. Then Ramsey's radio crackled from the cruiser outside, and the officer excused himself to take a dispatch call on the front porch. The door closed behind him, and the hallway rearranged itself like a chessboard between moves. Vivica moved first. She pulled Boyd toward the coat closet, and the two of them bent their heads together in the kind of whispered conference that only happens between people who have already agreed on a story and are now adjusting the details. I stood 10 feet away, close enough to catch fragments. He's not going to break, Vivica whispered. We need to move faster. Let the officer do his job, Boyd murmured back. It's better if it comes from them. I turned away as though I hadn't heard. But I'd heard enough. The accusation against me wasn't a reaction. It was a production staged, cast, and now being directed in real time by 2 people who'd rehearsed their parts before the curtain went up. A family is like a setting that holds stones in place. When the metal is sound, the stones stay put through decades of wear.
But when the metal is rotten, the stones don't fall all at once. They loosen slowly, one by one, until someone bumps the table and everything scatters. Garrett stood in the middle of the hallway, belonging to no one. Not with Vivica and Boyd by the closet. Not with me in the kitchen doorway. Not with Sloane, who had drifted to the opposite wall and was staring at her phone with the glazed focus of someone reading something that had nothing to do with the crisis around her. My son stood in the gap between every faction in his own house, and for the first time, he seemed to feel the weight of it. Every person in that hallway was performing for someone, and none of them realized I'd stopped being the audience. Before I tell you what happened next, before I reveal the detail that split this evening into before and after, are you still with me? Because this is where everything turns. Drop your prediction in one sentence. Who do you think is really behind the bracelet scheme? A quick note. The next part includes fictionalized details added to deepen the emotional impact. What matters is the lesson behind it. Sloane's phone buzzed. 3 times. Rapid, the vibration cutting through the hallway silence like a stone dropped on glass. Her lock screen lit up, and the notification preview glowed for 2 full seconds before she could swipe it away. I was too far to read the words. But Garrett wasn't. He was 3 feet from her. Close enough to see the screen. Close enough to read whatever name appeared in that notification. Whatever words followed it. Words that made his jaw clench and his whole body go rigid, the way a man goes rigid when he touches a live wire and can't let go. Sloane swiped the notification away with a flick that was too fast, too practiced. Client, she said to no one in particular. They never stop, even on holidays. Must be an important client, Garrett said. His voice was flat, not angry, not accusatory. Flat in the way that a surface is flat after something heavy has rolled over it and crushed every feature. Sloane didn't answer. She slid the phone into her cardigan pocket and crossed her arms again, sealing herself shut. I wanted to reach for my son in that moment. Not to say I told you so, I would never say that. Not about this. But to tell him that discovering who someone really is doesn't mean you were foolish for believing them. It means you were human. And being human is not the weakness they want you to think it is. Garrett stood very still for a long time. The car keys were in his hand. I hadn't seen him take them from the hook by the door. But he was gripping them now, the metal biting into his palm hard enough to leave marks. Then he walked to the front door, opened it to the sharp November air, and told Ramsey he'd like to drive his father home personally. Ramsey nodded. Vivica started to object, but Boyd put a hand on her arm, a restraining gesture that said, "Let him go." "This changes nothing." Garrett held the door open for me. Cold air rushed in, clean and bracing after hours of suffocating performance. And as I stepped past him onto the porch, he said 5 words I never expected to hear from him that night. "Dad, I need to talk." We were 3 steps from the front door when Boyd's voice stopped us cold. "Officer, I don't think Mr. Caldwell should be leaving the premises just yet." Garrett's hand was still on the door handle. I watched his knuckles whiten. Watched the 5 words he'd just said to me, the first real words all evening, get swallowed by the lawyer's smooth interruption. Boyd stepped into the foyer with his hands clasped behind his back, the posture of a man delivering a closing argument. "With an asset of this value, I'd recommend formal statements from all parties before anyone leaves. Standard procedure." Ramsey looked at Boyd, then at me, then at the open door letting November air pour into the hallway. He closed his notebook, opened it again, and nodded. "Sir, I'm going to need you to stay a bit longer. Shouldn't take more than 20 minutes. Garrett started to argue, but I put a hand on his arm. "Take as long as you need." "Officer," I said, "I'm not the one in a hurry." Boyd's trap had just snapped shut, or so he believed. I walked back into the living room and sat in the wingback chair by the window,
The seat faced the hallway, the front door, and the dining room archway all at once. I chose it the way I'd choose a loop for the angle it gave me. Vivica positioned herself on the sofa, Boyd standing behind her like a sentry. Garrett leaned against the doorframe with his arms crossed, watching Boyd the way he'd watched me earlier. Except now the suspicion pointed in a different direction. Sloane sat in the far corner, phone in her lap, thumb still. They had the lawyer, they had the money, they had the narrative and the officer's ear. And I had a chair by the window, and the knowledge that the stone in that bracelet was glass. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes it isn't. I was about to find out which. Ramsay began with Vivica. She delivered her version of the evening with the polished cadence of someone who'd been rehearsing it since before the police arrived. The bracelet displayed at dinner. Her shock at finding it missing. The search. The discovery in my coat. Boyd nodded along at intervals, adding legal context like footnotes. It was a performance. And Ramsay wrote it down without expression, his pen moving at a steady, unimpressed pace. I smelled the cold coffee on the side table, the wax from the extinguished dinner candles, the Thanksgiving spread nobody had bothered to clear. The house smelled like the aftermath of something not a holiday, but an event, a controlled demolition. Ramsay was asking Vivica about the bracelet's last known location when the dining room door flew open and hit the wall hard enough to rattle the picture frame beside it. Every adult in that room turned to face a 10-year-old boy, holding the truth in his hands. Theo stood in the doorway in his socked feet, chest heaving, his tablet clutched to his chest with both hands. The screen was bright. He'd been watching something, and whatever he'd seen had sent him running. "Grandpa!" His voice cracked the room's careful atmosphere like a rock through a window. "Grandpa! I watched it. The video. I saw who took it." Boyd moved first. "Theo, this is an adult conversation. Go back to your room." He said it sharp and fast, the way you swat at something before anyone can see what it is. But Theo didn't flinch. He looked at Boyd with the clear, unafraid eyes of a child who doesn't yet know he's supposed to be intimidated by men in cashmere coats. Then he looked at me. I didn't move from the chair. I didn't stand, didn't reach for him, didn't raise my voice. I just looked at my grandson and nodded. Once. Slowly. The way I taught him to confirm a stone's quality, with patience, with certainty, with no need to rush. "Officer," I said, turning to Ramsay, "I think you're going to want to see what my grandson has." Ramsay set his clipboard down. He walked to Theo, knelt to the boy's height, and gently took the tablet. The screen was still playing. I could see it from across the room. The hallway camera angle. The coat closet. A figure reaching into my jacket. Ramsay watched for 10 seconds. His expression didn't change, but his posture did. The unhurried patience replaced by the rigid attention of a man who has just realized the call he's on is not what he was told it was. He looked up. Not at me. Not at Theo. Directly at Vivica Prescott. And Vivica's mouth opened. But for the first time all evening, nothing came out. Have you ever watched a room full of liars realize, one by one, that the truth has been recording them the entire time? Ramsay held the tablet at arm's length, the screen still playing. Vivica's mouth was open but producing nothing, a struck bell with no sound. Boyd recovered first. He stepped forward with his hand extended, his voice snapping into the register he probably used in depositions. "Officer, that device belongs to a minor. You can't just accept unsolicited digital evidence without establishing chain of custody." "Mr. Wainwright." Ramsay didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He lowered the tablet to his side.
and turned to face Boyd with the unhurried patience of a man who has spent 20 years deciding who gets to talk and who gets to wait. I appreciate the legal guidance, but right now, I'm going to watch this video. You're welcome to observe, or you're welcome to wait outside. Boyd's jaw worked. I could see him calculating which argument, which precedent, which procedural objection might stop a patrol officer from pressing play on a child's homework tablet. But Ramsey had already turned away from him. And in that turn was everything Boyd couldn't buy with cashmere and case law, the authority of the only person in the room who actually wore a badge. I stepped forward. Not to the tablet, to Ramsey. Before you write anything down, officer, I'd ask you to watch this from the beginning. All of it. Ramsey looked at me. Whatever he saw in my face, and I imagine it was 68 years of patience arriving at its destination, he nodded once. A courtroom has rules. Opening statements, cross-examinations, objections sustained. But a dining room table with a tablet propped against a salt shaker has something better. No rules at all, and nowhere to hide. Ramsey set the tablet on the dining table and swiped the video back to the beginning. The screen's blue-white glow threw light across the abandoned Thanksgiving spread, cold turkey. Congealed gravy. The candles guttered down to waxy stumps. He propped the tablet against a serving dish and stepped back. Everyone stay where you are, he said. I'm going to play this from the start, and I don't want commentary until it's finished. The room rearranged itself around the screen, the way iron filings arrange around a magnet, involuntarily, inevitably. Garrett moved first, stepping behind Ramsey to see over his shoulder. His face was tight, his jaw set. But he didn't hesitate. Whatever was on that tablet. My son had decided he wanted to know. That alone was worth every insult I'd absorbed since walking through his front door. Sloane stayed in her corner chair, arms crossed, phone finally dark in her lap. She didn't move toward the table. She didn't move away. She sat perfectly still, with the careful composure of someone who has already decided what face to wear when the worst happens. Boyd positioned himself at the table's edge, close enough to see, already composing objections behind his eyes. His hand rested on his briefcase, the one holding the bracelet wrapped in his handkerchief. I noticed his thumb was tapping the leather in a rhythm that had nothing to do with patience. I want you to picture this 5 adults and 1 child standing around a 10-inch screen. And the only person in the room who isn't afraid of what it shows is the 10-year-old who pressed record. Theo sat on the floor by my feet, cross-legged, looking up at me. I put my hand on his shoulder. He leaned into it, a small, warm weight against my knee that steadied something in my chest I hadn't realized was shaking. He'd already watched the video alone in his bedroom. He already knew what was coming, and he'd chosen to bring it to me, not to his mother, not to his father, not to the lawyer in the cashmere coat. To me. Vivica was the last to move. She drifted from the living room doorway to the dining room entrance, but came no closer. She stood at the threshold with one hand on the doorframe, as far from the tablet as the room allowed without actually leaving. The distance told me everything the video hadn't yet confirmed. Innocent people lean in. Guilty people find doorways. Ramsey pressed play. The tablet's tiny speaker filled the dining room with hallway sounds, footsteps on hard wood, the creak of the coat closet door, the soft rustle of fabric. The footage was shaky. The angle slightly tilted where Theo had propped it against a stack of books on the hallway shelf. But the image was clear. A woman's hand reaching into my jacket. Fingers sliding something into the inside pocket. And the face above that hand was clear, too. It wasn't mine. The video was 47 minutes long, but only 11 seconds mattered. The face on the screen wasn't mine. It belonged to a woman, her features half obscured by the coat closet door, the hallway light catching the side of her jaw, her shoulder, the curve of her arm as she reached into my jacket. Ramsey rewound, played it again. The room watched in the kind of silence that has weight to it, the kind that presses against your chest. Boyd spoke first, because Boyd always spoke first.
The angle is inconclusive. You can't positively identify anyone from that footage. The face is partially blocked by... I said nobody speaks. Mr. Wainwright? Ramsey didn't look up from the screen. His thumb tapped rewind. The 11 seconds played again. The coat closet creak. The hand reaching in. The bracelet disappearing into the pocket lining with the practiced efficiency of someone who had rehearsed the motion. 3 replays. 3 times the same hand, the same reach, the same deliberate tuck of metal into fabric. Sloane's breathing had become audible, shallow, rapid. The sound of someone watching a car crash they can't stop. Garrett stood behind Ramsey with his arms rigid at his sides, watching the footage rewrite everything he'd believed about this evening. Boyd was right about one thing. The face was inconclusive. The closet door blocked the upper half, leaving only a chin, a jaw, the line of a neck. Any defense attorney worth his retainer could argue reasonable doubt. But Boyd wasn't the only person in the room who studied details for a living. How do you explain to a room full of people that you can identify a ring you repaired 16 years ago, the way a parent identifies their child's voice in a crowd, not by looking, but by knowing? You don't explain it. You show them. On the 3rd replay, I saw it. The ring finger of the hand sliding the bracelet into my coat. A rose gold signet ring with an engraved monogram V.A.P. The initials Vivica had insisted on keeping from her first marriage. The clasp had been broken that summer Garrett brought Sloane home for the first time, and Vivica had asked me to fix it. Not a jeweler on Madison Avenue, not one of the Bronxville shops she frequented. Me. The retired appraiser from Yonkers whose trade she'd spent the evening mocking. I built that hinge. I filed it with a number 4 needle file, polished it with rouge on a chamois wheel, and set it into the band with my own hands on a Tuesday afternoon in my shop on McLean Avenue. I remembered because she'd brought scones, and it was the only time Vivica Prescott had ever been kind to me without an audience. And now that hinge, my work, my hands, my craft, was the only thing standing between me and a theft charge. Officer, I said. My voice was quiet. The room heard every syllable. I'd like you to look at the ring on the hand in that video. Rose gold. Engraved monogram. There's a custom micro hinge on the clasp repair work I did myself about 16 years ago. Ramsey paused the video. The frame froze on the hand inside my coat, the ring catching the hallway light in a thin band of warm gold. Now look at Mrs. Prescott's right hand. Every head in the room turned toward the doorway. Vivica stood exactly where she'd been standing for the last 5 minutes, at the threshold, one hand on the doorframe, as far from the screen as geometry allowed. Her right hand hung at her side. The rose gold ring gleamed under the dining room light. The same warm gold, the same engraved monogram, the same hinge I'd built on a quiet Tuesday that neither of us had thought about since. Until now. Ramsey looked at the frozen screen. He looked at Vivica's hand. He looked at the screen again. The room was airless, stale food, dead candles, the sweat of people cornered by their own scheme. "Ma'am," Ramsey said, straightening to his full height, "I'm going to need you to stay right where you are." Vivica looked down at her own hand, as if seeing it for the first time. Then she closed her fist, slowly, deliberately, curring her fingers over the ring the way you close a book you wish you'd never opened. But it was too late. Ramsey had seen it. Garrett had seen it. Boyd had gone perfectly still, his hand frozen on his briefcase. The briefcase that held the bracelet he'd wrapped in a handkerchief to keep anyone from examining too closely. And I had known from the moment that hand reached into my coat on that tiny screen exactly whose hand it was. Because I made the ring that gave her away. Everyone in that room thought the worst was over. The video had played. The ring had been identified. The Veka stood in the doorway with her fist closed around the evidence on her own finger. And Ramsey was reaching for his notepad to begin the formal questioning. But I hadn't played my last card yet. "Officer Ramsey," I said. "There is one more thing." The room turned to me. Boyd's hand tightened on his briefcase. Vivica's closed fist pressed against her thigh. Garrett stood in the far doorway, gripping the frame with both hands, watching me the way you watch a surgeon about to make the first cut. I walked to the table where Boyd's briefcase sat. He didn't stop me. I unlatched it, unwrapped the handkerchief, and lifted the bracelet. It sat in my palm the way it had an hour earlier, too light, too cooperative, too willing to let the light pass through without a fight. I held it up under the dining room fixture. "This bracelet," I said, turning it so the stone caught the light, "contains a cubic zirconia stone, not a diamond. I've graded 10,000 stones in my career. This is glass." The silence that followed was different from every silence that had come before it. The earlier silences had been performative. People holding their breath for dramatic effect, waiting for their cue. This silence was genuine. This was the sound of 6 people recalculating everything they thought they knew about this evening. "The real diamond was removed and replaced months ago," I continued. "Whoever did it had access to the setting, knew the piece wouldn't be independently appraised anytime soon, and needed the swap to stay hidden. They needed someone to blame before anyone looked too closely. That's why I'm here tonight." I held that bracelet up to the light and told the truth the same way I've told the truth about every stone that ever passed through my hands in 41 years. The only difference was that this time the truth set me free instead of costing me a client. I looked at Vivica, not with anger, not with triumph, with the steady clarity of a man who has spent his whole life separating what's real from what's manufactured. "You didn't need me gone because I'm poor. Vivica, you needed me gone before I figured out the truth." She didn't answer. For 5 seconds, she stood perfectly still, the closed fist at her side, the other hand white-knuckled on the doorframe. Then something behind her eyes collapsed. Not dramatically, not with a scream or a sob, but the way a building collapses in slow motion when the foundation gives out. Her knees softened. She reached for the nearest chair and sat down heavily. The posture of a woman who had been holding herself upright by will alone and had finally run out. "I had no choice," she said. Her voice was stripped bare. No performance, no polish, no Bronxville inflection. Just a 64-year-old woman sitting in a dining room chair telling the truth for the first time all evening. "The debts. You don't understand what those people do when you can't pay." "Ma'am, I need to advise you that anything you say," Ramsey began. She talked over him as if he weren't there. "Boyd found a buyer, a private dealer. It was supposed to be clean. Replace the stone, collect the insurance difference, cover what I owed." She was looking at her hands now, the closed fist slowly opening, the ring exposed again. "But you were coming for Thanksgiving. And I knew if you touched that bracelet for even 5 seconds, you'd know it was glass. I thought I would feel satisfaction when she broke. I didn't. I felt something closer to grief, because watching someone destroy themselves is never satisfying, even when they spent the whole evening trying to destroy you. So you planted it in my coat, I said. Not a question. I couldn't let you see it. She looked up at me, and for 1 second, I saw something real behind the ruin, not remorse. Not yet, but the exhaustion of someone who has been running from a collapsing lie for months. You would have known in 5 seconds. You always know. The acrid smell of fear had replaced every other scent in the room, sharp, animal. The kind of smell that no amount of expensive perfume or Thanksgiving cinnamon can cover. Boyd hadn't moved. His hand was still on the briefcase, but his face had the fixed quality of a man doing math he doesn't like the answer to. Ramsey closed his notepad. He looked at Boyd, then at Vivica, then through the window at his cruiser. "I'm going to need backup," he said into his radio. "And someone from fraud." Then he turned to Garrett, who hadn't moved from the doorway, and spoke 6 words that would change my son's life. "Sir, did you know about this?" My son said no, sir, and for the first time all evening. I believed him completely. Garrett's voice was raw. He stood in the doorway with his hands at his sides, looking at Ramsey the way a man looks at a judge when the verdict could go either way. "I didn't know about the diamond. I didn't know about the sale. I didn't know any of it." Ramsey studied him for a long moment, then nodded and made a note on his clipboard, whatever he wrote. It moved Garrett from one column to another, from suspect to witness, from complicit to deceived. That should have been the end of it. The video, the ring, the confession, the fake stone, all of it laid bare under the dining room light like a watch with its case pried open. Every broken gear exposed. But this family had one more secret left to spill, and it chose the worst possible moment to surface. Ramsey began formally cautioning Vivica. Boyd reached for his briefcase. Sloane backed toward the kitchen, arms folded tight, retreating from the collapsing center of the room. And in that scramble of bodies and panic, her phone slipped from her cardigan pocket and hit the hardwood floor, face up. A phone hitting hardwood shouldn't sound like a gunshot, but when what's on the screen is a marriage ending in real time, the crack of glass on wood is the loudest thing in the house. The screen lit on impact. The notification preview glowed for everyone within 5 feet, and Garrett was 3 feet away. I saw his eyes drop to the floor. I saw him read. I saw the stillness that followed. The particular rigidity of a man absorbing information his body wants to reject, but his mind has already processed. He bent down and picked up the phone. He held it in front of him, scrolling with his thumb. 3 messages, maybe 4. The silence lasted 6 seconds. Then he set the phone on the dining room table. Screen down, with the careful precision of someone placing a lid on something they never want to see again. "Garrett," Sloane said. Her voice cracked on the second syllable. "Garrett, let me explain. It's not—" "Don't." One word. He didn't shout it. He didn't whisper it. He said it at normal volume, in a normal tone. And it was the most devastating thing I'd heard all night. Because it wasn't anger. It was finality. He walked out of the room. Not through the front door. Down the hallway. Toward the back of the house. Toward the room that used to be his study before it became Sloane's home office. The door didn't slam. He just let it close behind him. And the soft click of the latch was worse than any slam could have been. I watched my son leave carrying something heavier than a bracelet. The knowledge that the 2 people he'd trusted most had been sharing more than a conspiracy. Boyd moved. He picked up his briefcase and walked toward the front door with the measured stride of a man who has decided the situation is no longer professionally advantageous. Ramsey stepped into his path. "Mr. Wainwright, Mrs. Prescott named you as the broker of the diamond sale. I'm going to need you to stay until I've taken your statement." "I'm an attorney." Boyd's voice had lost its polish. It sounded like what it was, a man trying to find the exit of a room that no longer had one. "You can't detain me without—"
You're a witness, counselor. Sit down. I could have stood there and watched. I could have let the satisfaction wash over me. The man who called me a thief being told to sit down by the same officer he'd tried to weaponize against me. But satisfaction is a young man's reward. I'm 68. I wanted my grandson. I turned away from the hallway, from the wreckage, from Boyd lowering himself into a chair with his briefcase on his knees and Vivica weeping in hers. I walked past the cold Thanksgiving plates nobody had cleared, past the guttered candles, past the salt shaker that had propped up the tablet that changed everything. I found Theo in the dining room, sitting cross-legged on the floor with the brooch in one hand and the tablet cord in the other. He looked up at me with eyes that had seen too much for one Thanksgiving. "Grandpa," he said, "are the police going to take Grandma Vivica away?" I lowered myself to the cold floor beside him. My knees complained. My back complained. Nothing else in my body had any complaints left. Just the hollow, flat exhaustion of a man who had used up all his truths in one evening. I told him the truth, because that's what I do. That's all I've ever done. I told Theo the truth, that Grandma Vivica had done something wrong, that the police were going to talk to her about it, and that none of it was his fault. He nodded the way children nod when they understand more than you think they do. Then I kissed the top of his head, stood up from the cold floor, and walked toward the front door. I was halfway to my car when I heard the door open behind me and my son's footsteps on the gravel running. "Dad?" Garrett caught me by the driver's side door. The driveway floodlight hit his face, and I saw what was underneath the operations manager. The husband. The man who'd spent the evening choosing the wrong side of every decision. His face was red and crumpled, his breath coming in white clouds in the November cold, his eyes wet in a way I hadn't seen since he was 12 and our dog died on the kitchen floor. "Dad, I'm sorry." The words came out broken, unpunctuated, tumbling over each other like stones down a hill. "I asked you to confess to something you didn't do. In front of your grandson. I knew somewhere. I knew it wasn't you. And I still asked. I chose them over you because it was easier. And I will never—" His voice cracked. He put his hands on his knees and bent forward, and the sound that came out of him was the kind of crying a father never wants to hear from his child. Not the tantrums of boyhood, or the frustrations of adolescence, but the sound of a grown man realizing he became someone he swore he'd never be. The police cruiser's lights still pulsed faintly from the far side of the house. Somewhere inside, Ramsey was taking Boyd's statement. Vivica was sitting in a chair waiting for her world to finish collapsing. And out here in the driveway, in the wood smoke and cold asphalt and the faint exhaust from my idling engine, my son was asking me to make it right. "Can you forgive me?" he said. 3 words. The simplest question in the English language and the hardest one to answer honestly. I put my hand on his shoulder. The same hand that had held the brooch, the bracelet, the truth all evening. Firm and brief. The weight of it meant to be both a blessing and a boundary. "I hear you, son. And your apology matters. I want you to know that." He looked up. Hope. The raw, unguarded hope of a child who has broken something and believes his father can fix it. How do you forgive someone you love for the exact moment they stopped loving you back, even if it only lasted an hour? How do you explain that the hour is the problem, that the rest of the evening, the rest of the years, the rest of the love doesn't erase the 60 minutes when your son looked at you and chose to believe the people who were framing you? "You don't explain it, you tell the truth. But you didn't protect me when it mattered most," I said. My voice was steady. Not cold, I wasn't punishing him.
I was giving him the same thing I'd given every client who brought me a stone they hoped was real. An honest assessment, even when it hurt.
You asked me to lie so your evening could end quietly. That's something I'll carry. And it's something you need to carry too. The hope in his face didn't die. It changed. It became something older and more complicated. The beginning of understanding that forgiveness isn't a transaction. It's not an apology exchanged for absolution. It's a road. And we were standing at the start of it, not the end. What do I do now? He asked. I didn't answer. Not because I didn't have an answer, but because the answer wasn't mine to give. He was 38 years old. He had a son asleep on a dining room floor, a wife whose phone told a story he'd never unhear, and a mother-in-law being questioned for fraud in his own living room. What he did now was his to decide. I squeezed his shoulder once, then I opened the car door, and the cold handle bit into my fingers like a small, necessary pain. Drive safe, Dad, Garrett said. His voice was hoarse. I will. I pulled the door shut, started the engine, and backed out of the driveway. Through the window I could see him standing under the floodlight with his arms at his sides, watching me leave. I didn't wave. I turned onto the road toward Yonkers, and as the Scarsdale streetlights faded behind me, I realized something I hadn't expected. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt 68 years old. The phone rang at 6 in the morning, and for the first time in years, I didn't dread the sound of my son's voice. I'd driven the Sawmill River Parkway home in the dark, parked in my usual spot behind the building, climbed the stairs to my apartment, and sat at the kitchen table until the sky turned gray. I didn't sleep. I brewed coffee and drank it black, and let the silence do what silence does when you give it room. It sorts things. By the time the phone rang, I knew what I wanted. Dad, Garrett said. His voice was hoarse, scraped raw from a night that had clearly been as sleepless as mine. Ramsey called. He needs to know if you want to press charges. The full extent false accusation, conspiracy to frame, all of it, on top of the fraud case. I looked out my kitchen window at the Yonkers morning. A delivery truck was backing into the alley. A woman was walking a dog in the cold. The world was doing what it always does, continuing regardless of what happened in a Scarsdale dining room the night before. I want a written apology, I said, from Vivica. Formal, on the record. I want her kept away from any gathering where I am present, and I want the fraud case to proceed. She sold an heirloom and framed me to cover it. That consequences. And the false accusation charge. Revenge is easy. Any fool with a grievance can pursue it. But choosing exactly how much justice you need, and stopping there, requires something revenge never asks of you. It requires you to think about who you'll be tomorrow. I don't need her to lose everything, Garrett. I just need the truth spoken aloud. That's enough. It has to be enough. The line was quiet for a long time. Then Garrett said, I'll tell Ramsey. He paused. I could hear him breathing, working up to something. Can I bring Theo by this afternoon? He's been asking about you since you left. Bring him, I said. I spent the morning cleaning. Not because the apartment was dirty. I can neat, always have. But because I wanted Theo to walk into a space that felt like it was waiting for him. I cleared the kitchen table, set out the tin of shortbread I keep for company that rarely comes, and put a fresh bulb in the hallway light that had been flickering for a week. Small things. The kind of things you do when you're getting ready for someone who matters. At 2 o'clock, I heard sneakers on the stairs. Not walking, running. 2 at a time. The sound ricocheting up the narrow stairwell like a rubber ball. Theo appeared in the doorway, out of breath,
his jacket carrying the November cold inside with him. He didn't say anything. He crossed the apartment in 4 strides and threw his arms around my neck with a force that nearly took me off my feet. My grandson ran up 3 flights of stairs to hug me. And in that moment, every insult from the night before, the poverty jokes, the seating arrangement, the coat search, the bracelet planted in my pocket weighed exactly nothing. I held him. I let him hold on as long as he needed, which turned out to be a long time. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were wet, but his jaw was set. The Caldwell jaw. The one Garrett used to have before he started clenching it for the wrong reasons. "Grandpa, are you mad at Dad?" "Your dad made a mistake," I said. "People do that. What matters is what they do after." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the brooch. The small vintage piece I'd given him at dinner. The one with the real garnet I'd used to teach him about authenticity. He'd been carrying it since last night, through the screaming, the police, the confession, the drive home. He held it out on his open palm, the stone catching the afternoon light from my kitchen window. "I kept it safe," he said, "like you told me." I knelt down, my knees reminding me of every year I'd earned, and closed his small fingers around the brooch. "It's yours, Theo. You keep it. And I'll be here every Saturday, every holiday, every time you want to learn something about stones or anything else. That's a promise, and I don't break those." He nodded. Then he hugged me again. Garrett stood at the bottom of the stairs. I could see him through the open apartment door, engine off, hands in his pockets, waiting in the cold while his son and his father held on to each other. He didn't come up. He wasn't ready yet. And I wasn't ready to invite him. But he stayed. That's not forgiveness. But it's a start. The newspapers covered the story for 11 days. I didn't read a single one. Garrett started calling. Not every day we weren't there yet, but every few days, cautious and careful. The way you test a bridge before you put your full weight on it. He told me what was happening in fragments, and I listened from the quiet of my kitchen table with a cup of black coffee and the radiator ticking in the background. Vivica was removed from 2 charity boards within the first week. The Bronxville Arts Council asked her to resign before the fraud investigation became public record. She did. Boyd Wainwright's practice was suspended, pending a formal ethics inquiry from the Bar Association, brokering the private sale of a client's family asset, and then helping frame an innocent man for the theft turned out to be the kind of professional conduct that even attorneys couldn't polish into respectability. "And Sloan?" I asked during one of those calls. Garrett was quiet for a long time. "She moved back to Bronxville. I've started the paperwork. Theo stays with me." He said it the way you say things that are still too raw to feel real. Flatly. Quickly. As if speaking the words at normal speed might make them hurt less. I didn't ask for details. He'd tell me when he was ready. Or he wouldn't. Either way. The Prescott family's carefully constructed world, the Bronxville address, the charity galas, the estate attorney on speed dial was coming apart at the seams, and every thread led back to an evening when they tried to frame a retired appraiser from Yonkers for stealing a bracelet that wasn't even real. Justice isn't a single moment. It's a season. It arrives slowly, the way December arrives one cold day at a time, until you look up and realize the landscape has changed completely. I stopped following the aftermath, not because I didn't care, but because I'd learned something that Thanksgiving night that most people never learn. The best thing you can do after being proven right is to go home and live quietly. Revenge makes noise. Truth makes silence. And silence, it turns out, is where I do my best work. I went back to the bench. The Hamilton was the first thing I finished mainspring seated. Case closed. ticking quiet and steady on the shelf for the first time in months. My workbench sits by the apartment window. The same window. The same lamp. The same arrangement of tools I've kept since I moved in. A neighbor from the second floor, Mrs. Devereaux, had brought me an antique cameo brooch the week before Thanksgiving. The pin mechanism was frozen, and the shell had a hairline crack along the left profile. I'd been meaning to get to it. I sat down on the stool. I fitted the loop against my eye, the familiar pressure of the lens against my socket, the way it narrows the world to a circle of magnified truth. I'd missed it. The cameo's surface was warm and worn under my fingertips. Decades of someone's touch embedded in the shell. If you're waiting for me to tell you I celebrated, I didn't. If you're waiting for me to say I felt sorry for them, I didn't do that either. I felt something simpler than both. I felt finished. The work hasn't changed. The light through this window hasn't changed. The only thing that changed was that I stopped apologizing for the size of the room I do it in. This apartment, this bench, this lamp, they were never a demotion. They were a distillation. 41 years of learning to see clearly, reduced to the essentials. Good light, steady hands, and the patience to look at something until it tells you what it really is. I didn't need the world to know I was innocent. I needed to know it myself. And I always had. Some men retire and disappear. I retired and became exactly who I always was, just quieter about it. I worked on the cameo for 2 hours that Saturday afternoon. Fixed the pin mechanism, stabilized the crack with a micro-application of conservation adhesive. Cleaned the profile with a soft brush until the carved face emerged from decades of grime, looking like she'd been waiting to be seen properly. Good work. Honest work. The kind that doesn't need an audience. The doorbell rang at 4 o'clock. I set down my loop, wiped my hands on the cloth, and opened the door. Theo was standing there with his backpack and a paper bag from the bakery on McLean Avenue. The smell of warm bread and sugar came through the brown paper like a small, sweet announcement. Behind him, 3 steps down, Garrett waited, hands in his pockets. Engine off. I looked at my son, and this time he took a step up. I opened the door wider. Garrett stepped inside my apartment for the first time, and he looked around the way you look at a place you're seeing clearly after years of not really looking. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. Theo was already at the workbench, pulling the bakery bag open and asking if he could use the loop. That was 3 weeks ago. I am 68 years old, and for the first time in my life, I am working for no one but myself. The corner by the window is a proper workshop now. I outfitted it the week after Thanksgiving, not with expensive equipment, but with what matters, a jeweler's lamp that throws clean, warm circles on the work surface. Felt-lined trays arranged the way they were in the old shop on McLean Avenue, and my tools laid out in the order my hands expect to find them. The shop is gone, but the hands are the same. The eye is the same, and the truth is the same. A real stone fights the light, and a real man fights for what's honest. Neighbors started bringing me pieces. Mrs. Devereaux from the second floor came back with a tarnished locket that hadn't opened in 20 years. The super's wife brought a vintage ring that needed resizing. A young woman from the building next door handed me a broken clasp her grandmother had worn every Sunday to church. I don't charge much. I don't need to. The work itself is the payment. The return of purpose. The steady hands. The proof that what I know still matters to someone besides me. Garrett visits on Saturdays now. Always with Theo. Sometimes staying for coffee. We don't talk about Thanksgiving. We don't need to, yet. The road between us is long, and we're both walking it at the pace it requires, not the pace either of us would choose, but the pace that honesty demands.
"The place looks good, Dad," he said last Saturday, standing in the doorway with his coat still on. "It looks like you."
"It always did," I said. "I just forgot for a while. If you've stayed with me this long, I want you to know something. The best things I own fit inside a wooden box that costs $12 at a flea market. Not one of them can be appraised. Not one of them would survive a jeweler's valuation. And not one of them would I trade for every diamond I've ever held." This Saturday, Theo arrived with something besides the bakery bag. He had a piece of paper folded inside his jacket, creased from being carried carefully, the way children carry things they've decided are important. He pulled it out and unfolded it on the workbench next to the loop. It was a drawing. 2 stick figures at a table, one tall, one small, with a bright yellow circle overhead that I understood was the jeweler's lamp. The tall figure held something tiny between his fingers. The small figure leaned in close, and across the top, in a child's block letters, one word: real. "I made this at school," Theo said. "Mrs. Whitfield said we should draw what matters most." "And you drew this?" "That's us. Grandpa. At the bench." He pointed to the word above. "I put real because you said that's the only thing that counts." A 10-year-old boy drew 2 people at a workbench and wrote the word real across the top. And in 41 years of appraising precious things, it was the most valuable piece I ever held. I studied it the way I study every piece that comes across my bench. Carefully, completely, seeing everything the artist put into it. The yellow lamp, the 2 figures leaning toward each other, the letters printed with the deliberate pressure of a hand that wanted every stroke to be right. I opened the wooden box on the shelf by the window. Inside was the brooch, the small vintage piece with the real garnet that I'd given Theo at Thanksgiving dinner, the one he'd carried through the screaming and the police and the confession and the long ride home. I placed the drawing beside it, smoothed the creases with my thumb, and closed the lid. The December sun came through the window and caught the wood grain, turning it gold. Somewhere in Scarsdale, a family was still sorting through the wreckage. But here, in a 1-bedroom apartment in Yonkers, a grandfather and his grandson sat at a workbench under a jeweler's lamp. And everything in the room was real. You can fake a diamond, you can fake a family, but you cannot fake the kind of love that teaches a child what truth looks like and then watches him carry it forward in his own 2 hands. And to you listening to my story, remember this. I spent 41 years learning to tell a real diamond from a fake one. But the hardest lesson I ever learned had nothing to do with stones. It was learning to tell the difference between people who love you and people who need you to stay quiet, so their version of the truth goes unchallenged. Don't make my mistake. Don't wait until you're sitting in a chair while your own family searches your coat to realize that silence isn't always loyalty. Sometimes silence is just the space where dignity goes to die. This revenge story taught me something I carry every single day. The greatest revenge isn't destruction. It's choosing exactly how much justice you need and stopping there. It's showing your grandson what truth looks like and watching him write the word real on a drawing in block letters because he understood. I believe God put me through that Thanksgiving evening for a reason, not to punish me, but to show me that my worth was never in the size of my apartment or the balance in my account. It was in my hands, my eye, and the honesty I refused to let anyone take from me. If you're going through your own revenge story right now, if someone in your family is making you feel small so they can feel powerful, I want you to know this. The truth doesn't need volume. It needs patience.